For 42 years, he ruled a nation with his bare fists. He slept in silk tents, surrounded by an all-female bodyguard corps. He was chauffeured through the streets of Tripoli in motorcades that stretched for half a mile. World leaders flew to him. He did not fly to them. He planted his Bedouin tent in the gardens of the Élysée Palace. He lectured the United Nations for 94 minutes while diplomats squirmed in their chairs. He called himself the King of Kings of Africa, the brother leader, the guide of the 1st of September Great Revolution. He was, in his own mind, eternal. And then, on the morning of October 20th, 2011, a man was pulled bleeding and terrified from a concrete drainage pipe on the outskirts of a bombed-out Libyan town called Sirte. He was trembling, he was begging, his golden pistol was already gone, stripped from him by the hands that yanked him from the darkness. The man who had never bowed to anyone in 4 decades was now pressed against the earth, howling, "What have I done to you?" Those around him had no intention of answering. This is the story of how the highest throne in North Africa became a drainage ditch. Muammar Gaddafi was born in 1942 in a goat hair tent in the Libyan desert outside Sirte, the same city where he would ultimately die. His family were semi-nomadic Bedouin. His early years were dust and poverty, and the absolute humiliation of a nation occupied first by the Ottomans, then by the Italians, then governed by a king propped up by Western oil interests. That humiliation never left him. It calcified into something cold and furious. He consumed the ideas of Gamal Abdel Nasser, the Egyptian nationalist, like oxygen. He dreamed of Arab unity, of oil wealth returned to Arab hands, of a revolution that would shake the Mediterranean. In 1969, he was 27 years old and a junior military officer when he executed a nearly bloodless coup against King Idris while the king was abroad for medical treatment. No real resistance, no real war. The old order simply folded. By the time the sun rose over Tripoli the next morning, Muammar Gaddafi was in control of a country sitting on the largest proven oil reserves in Africa. What followed looked at first almost remarkable. He nationalized the oil industry. He expelled American and British military bases from Libyan soil. He built schools in a country where most people couldn't read. He constructed hospitals in the desert. He built a water pipeline, the Great Man-Made River, an engineering project so vast it was called the 8th wonder of the world, pumping ancient aquifer water from beneath the Sahara to the coastal cities. By certain measures, Libya had the highest human development index in Africa. Literacy climbed. Life expectancy rose. Some Libyans genuinely loved him, but behind the infrastructure and the grand revolutionary rhetoric was something far darker. Behind the grand speeches was a machinery of terror so thorough and so personal it made other dictatorships look almost bureaucratic. Gaddafi didn't merely imprison opponents, he televised their executions on state TV. He ran a network of informants so dense that Libyan families learned not to speak honestly even inside their own homes. He funded terrorist operations across the world, from the IRA in Ireland to the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, killing 270 people. He sponsored coups and assassinations across Africa and the Middle East. Dissidents who fled abroad were hunted by hit squads. The man who built hospitals also built a state of absolute, suffocating fear. The miracle and the atrocity were always the same project.
In December 2010, a Tunisian street vendor named Mohamed Bouazizi set himself on fire in front of a government building to protest the humiliation of having his cart confiscated. He died of his burns 18 days later. The ripple that single act sent across the Arab world was something no intelligence service had predicted and no dictator had prepared for. Tunisia fell. Egypt fell. The crowds filling Tahrir Square chanted down Hosni Mubarak, a man Gaddafi had personally despised and privately envied for 30 years. And then, in February 2011, the protests reached Libya. They began in Benghazi, the country's second city, a place that had always simmered with resentment toward the Tripoli-centered regime. At first, they were peaceful, Libyans carrying signs, Libyans demanding reform, normal people, many of them young, who had grown up under the only system they had ever known and had decided, watching their neighbors, that they no longer wanted it. Gaddafi's response was not dialogue. It was not even the cold, calculated repression of a cautious autocrat. It was operatic contempt. He went on state television, and what he delivered was not a speech, it was a performance of madness. He called the protesters rats. He called them drug addicts fed hallucinogenic pills by Osama bin Laden. He promised that he would hunt down opponents alley by alley, room by room. He used the phrase zenga zenga, meaning alley by alley, and the Arabic-speaking world instantly turned it into a meme, a piece of digital mockery, which was perhaps the first sign that the world he understood had already ended. His military moved on Benghazi, artillery shelled residential neighborhoods, snipers were deployed. Reports emerged of African mercenaries hired to fire on crowds because Gaddafi no longer trusted his own soldiers to do so. And it was precisely this, hiring foreign guns to kill Libyan civilians, that broke something irreversible inside the country. Army units defected, senior ministers booked flights out of Tripoli, ambassadors resigned in tears at the United Nations. The man who had spent 4 decades positioning himself as the father of the Libyan people had just announced in the clearest possible language that he regarded those people as vermin. The hunter had shown his real face, and in doing so, he became the hunted.
On March 17, 2011, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 1973, authorizing a no-fly zone over Libya and the use of military force to protect civilians. Within 48 hours, French Rafale jets were in the air. American Tomahawk cruise missiles began landing on Libyan air defense installations. NATO had entered the war. What followed was not a contest. Libya's military, gutted by decades of Gaddafi's deliberate policy of keeping any potential rival force weak, had no answer for precision strikes launched from aircraft it could not reach. Command centers vanished. Armored columns advancing on Benghazi were destroyed from above in open desert, vehicles burning in long lines along the coastal road, visible on satellite imagery like a broken necklace of fire. The rebel forces, disorganized, poorly armed, fighting their first war, suddenly had the most powerful military alliance in human history flying cover for them. The momentum reversed completely. Town by town, the map turned. Misra held, Zawiya fell to the rebels. And then on August 23, 2011, rebel fighters stormed Bab al-Azizia, the Tripoli compound where Gaddafi had governed, threatened, and performed his cult of personality for over 40 years. They walked through his tent. They sat in his golf cart. They found his private quarters, his portraits, the strange debris of a 42-year fantasy of invincibility, and they tore it apart with their hands. Gaddafi was already gone. He had fled. And what is remarkable in retrospect is not that he fled, it is that he apparently believed he could still win. Even as NATO aircraft hunted his communications, even as his government dissolved around him, even as city after city declared for the rebels, he kept issuing audio messages. He called for resistance. He called on loyal tribes to rise. He promised, in the strange, persisting tense of the delusional, that victory was coming. He was broadcasting into silence, the frequencies no one was monitoring anymore, except to mock. He retreated to Sirte, his birthplace, his last redoubt. He was down to a small group of loyalists, to a convoy of vehicles, to rumors and confusion. The brother leader of the Great Revolution was hiding, in the city of his birth, with nowhere else to go.
On the morning of October 20th, his convoy tried to break out of Sirte under cover of what remained of the night's darkness. The plan, if it could be called that, was to reach the desert to the south and melt away, as desert men do, into the landscape that had always been his mythology of origin. He had been born from this ground. Perhaps he believed it would protect him. NATO surveillance drones saw the convoy. French and American aircraft struck it. The vehicles scattered and burned. Those who survived the strikes ran in every direction, and Gaddafi, wounded, disoriented, bleeding, scrambled into the mouth of a large concrete drainage culvert alongside a handful of remaining bodyguards. He was found there, cowering in the pipe, his face streaked with blood and dust, still wearing the brown robe of a man who had spent 40 decades being addressed as a deity. When the rebel fighters pulled him out, the footage they captured is almost unbearable to watch, not because of its violence, but because of its raw, irreducible smallness. This was not the fall of a statue. This was something more primitive. The man who had pointed his finger at the world for 42 years was now having his own finger pointed at him, hauled along by his collar, his legs giving out, his voice reduced to pleading, "Don't shoot, don't shoot." The gold pistol he had carried as a prop of supreme power was already gone, taken by the first hands that reached him. The official account says he died of wounds sustained in the crossfire. The video record suggests something considerably less clinical. Within hours, his body was laid on display in a commercial refrigeration unit in a Misrata shopping center. Libyans lined up to see it. They photographed it. They brought their phones. The man who had wanted to be buried as a martyr of Islam was displayed like meat. What remained in the days that followed was this: a country with no functioning institutions, because Gaddafi had deliberately destroyed every institution that might have challenged him. No real army, no real civil service, no political parties, no judiciary, no independent press. He had ruled for 42 years and had built as his successor state nothing whatsoever. The vacuum he left behind was total, and Libya has been falling into that vacuum ever since. So here is the question that the image of a man bleeding in a drainage pipe in the desert demands of us. Was this justice, the natural, inevitable reckoning that awaits every person who spends decades treating human lives as disposable? Or was it simply revenge, raw, medieval, and ultimately purposeless? The same cycle of humiliation and violence that Gaddafi himself had set spinning half a century before. The pipe is empty now. The gold pistol is somewhere in a collector's cabinet. The tent is gone. The throne was always a tent anyway. And Libya is still waiting for the answer.